Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, the show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Graham, and today I'm talking with Jim Sutherland, founder of Studio Sutherland. Design practice built around ideas, collaboration, and joy. Jim is one of those designers whose work you've almost certainly encountered without knowing it. His work has no fixed visual signature, no house style, just a consistent quality of thinking that adapts to whatever the project demands. Before Studio Sutherland, he was a founding partner at Hat-Trick Design, and more recently he's been involved in Matter, a denim brand that asks uncomfortable questions about whether the world needs another product at all, and tries to answer them honestly. Here's Jim on what drives his work.
I think the more joy you put into a project, the more joy everybody has when they're working on it. And then the end result has more joy, which brings joy to the people that are seeing the work that you're doing. So it is this sort of virtuous circle.
Hi, Cadley. How are you doing?
Hi, Graham. I'm doing well. So you just sat down with Jim at the Pixiu recording studio in London. What was Jim like?
Yeah, Jim was great company. It was the first time I'd met him, but it didn't feel like it whatsoever. I think we gelled and the conversation flowed. He's very thoughtful, unpretentious, a designer's designer, and I think his approach is fantastic.
Nice. What should folks listen out for in this episode?
Well, there's a few things worth flagging. He talked about stepping back from running a large agency, what you lose, but more importantly, what becomes possible when you shed that infrastructure. We got into the Matter denim project in some depth, the tension of making something physical and slow in an industry that rewards fast and disposable. It's a genuinely interesting set of contradictions that we spoke about. There's a conversation about joy, not as an aesthetic choice, but as a design philosophy, and why Jim thinks it's actually persuasive rather than frivolous. And finally, he answers what the simplest idea is that he wishes he'd come up with first. If you think about the red thread running through all of it, really, is what design is actually for. And Jim has thought about that more carefully than most, and it's really worth listening to.
Well, thank you for hosting. I'll turn it over to you and Jim.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype. I'm joined here today at Pixiu Studios by Jim Sutherland, founder and creative director of Studio Sutherland. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
I want to start with a typographic question. So your studio name, Sutherland, you've put an ampersand front and center in the branding.
Yep.
Of course, the ampersand was one of the most expressive characters in typography. Do you have a favorite ampersand? And if so, what is it? And what makes a great ampersand?
In my identity, I use Baskerville Roman because I think it's just a really classic letter form. I think ampersands are sort of overused and slightly abused in lots of sort of design circles. I've always been slightly reticent of overdoing it and absolutely failing at that. So I did a book a few years ago, which I think I sent you, that's got 400 of them in or something, that some of which we commissioned, some of which we found, some of which we've done for projects, some of which by other collaborators. So it's a letter form that I love, and I find them in, rubber bands and paper clips, and you just find them all over. It's become obviously a sort of symbol and quite a recognisable part of the studio in some ways.
I mean, in terms of the ampersand itself, so that kind of and feature, I think that is almost representative of the way that you work as well, in a way, isn't it? Because you're highly collaborative and builds teams around projects.
Yeah, so when I set the studio up, about 2 years before, I'd done a letterpress workshop with Kelvin Smith, a really well-known letterpress printer and designer. And I'd done a workshop with him. I knew him from college days. He'd set up a studio near where I live in Kennington. And you had to turn up for this one day and set your name on a piece of paper and then print it. So I did that, and he said, you just did what everybody else does. You go for all the big letters straight away, like the big woodblock type, things like that. And I realised I couldn't fit my name when I set it on a sort of A2 sheet. So I put an ampersand in instead of an and, without really thinking about it. And then that would have been, I think, 2 years before I set up. when I set up, I thought, right, I'm going to call it Studio Sutherland. And I thought I need to do a logo of some kind. And then I saw that bit of paper hanging up and I thought, I'll do that. So it wasn't really intentional in a good way. What it's come to do is when I set up, and it is just me and one designer, currently Ethan, we do work collaboratively on every single project. So apart from the fact that it used the name, it also did completely embody what we do as a studio, helpfully.
And in terms of that kind of collaboration aspect, have you ever brought someone into a project who's completely disrupted your thinking?
Yeah, when I did the Ampersand book, the collaboration of Ampersands, I asked various people we've worked with to contribute a sort of quote about what they thought collaboration was about. And I think the key with collaboration is to be quite uncomfortable at times and work with people that aren't going to just do the same thing that you would do. A good example for me would be, say, Thomas Sharp, who's the poet and writer we've worked with a lot now. We come from things from a very different sort of perspective. His love of words and language, which I have as well, but have no ability in. Sometimes there are ideas that he comes up with, which there's no way I'd ever even start in that place. So I think that's when I hope the work becomes much more interesting, because you are working with people that are a bit more challenging to what you do. It doesn't mean it's confrontational. You learn to listen, I think, a lot more to other people's views and opinions, and try not to be too belligerent or dogmatic about your own views. Especially when you've been working a long time, you can sort of slip into ways of working and the sorts of projects that you do. And I'm very keen not to do that.
Just to hang on that collaboration part. So, yeah, I think from my own experience, often collaborating with people who are kind of different specialisms to you kind of brings something new to the project, doesn't it? And it's like a 1 + 1 = 3 aspect. If you could construct your dream team for a project across any discipline, who's in the room?
I think any questions that involve dreams or plans or what you'd like to be able to do or dream client list, I find it difficult to answer, because I think what's happened with the studio is that you naturally end up collaborating with people that you didn't even know existed. In previous studios and things, you'd write a list of clients you wanted to work for, and it was all the people that were doing amazing work already. And so you realise a bit later on that actually it's the happenstance and the sort of the people you didn't know. Like Tom Sharp is a really good example of somebody I didn't really know much about, slightly stumbled across him a few times. Then he knew I was interested in chess, and he said, I'm doing this chess project, do you want to get involved? And I wouldn't have written him down as somebody I want to go and work with him, because I didn't know anything about him. So I'm very interested in the idea of curiosity and, I say, things that you stumble across. I think there's some sort of creative karma or sort of cosmic connections. I think you come across people because you needed to come across them at a certain time, or they needed to come across you. And that, I'd say most of the most interesting projects we've done or are doing have not been through design. They've been through chance. But I think that chance has been slightly engineered by being curious and interested and enthusiastic. People want to do projects together. So
your work's clearly driven by ideas, which I love. Have you ever been tempted to develop a recognisable signature? I mean, some agencies have kind of, made a really good living out of kind of having a signature.
I get bored very easily, so I tend to try and move on. I'm very envious of almost everybody else's work. So I look around and think I want to do things like that, or I want to do things like that. And so I like being quite sort of chameleon-like. I think my work has changed quite a bit with the new studio. I started off at the Partners very ideas-based, not typography-based. I studied at Norwich, very ideas-based, not typography-based. And so I felt there was this sort of void. So I started doing lots of typographic projects to, if really honest, improve my knowledge of typography and understanding of grids and design systems and things, which weren't the sort of things I looked at when I was younger. And now I almost exclusively look at those sorts of things. And I think the world has moved on. I think design has moved on. I've never liked the idea that there's like ideas work and then there's sort of style-based work and there's some total chasm between them. I like the idea that you can knit them together. So I don't really want to have a style, and I want to get better at design by doing more unusual work and work that surprises me if I can.
I think it gives you more scope as well, doesn't it? You can kind of flex according to the client, the brief, the idea.
And I think if you surround yourself with interesting collaborators and younger designers and things like that, we're doing a lot more motion work, which I know very little about, really. I'm still very hands-on. I still design a lot, which is partly why I reset the studio up with just me and one person, because I was getting a bit sort of distance from doing the work itself.
Let's talk about joy.
Yes.
It's an important characteristic of your work.
Yep.
You've said it's persuasive.
Yep.
Do you think it's something you discover in a project or something you deliberately inject into it?
I'm not sure I see a difference between the two. I love doing this, and I think that the joy I get from doing design, I think, becomes quite infectious with clients and the collaborators you're working with. I think the more joy you put into a project, the more joy everybody has when they're working on it. And then the end result has more joy, which brings joy to the people that are seeing the work that you're doing. So it is this sort of virtuous circle, and the more joy you put in. And I think it's something for me that feels very pertinent at the moment, with so much sort of doom and gloom around the world, around the industry, the news. This is such a privilege to do this job, and I think we should all be enjoying it. And the more we all enjoy it, the more people around us will get more joy out of it. So I feel very fortunate and very aware of the position I'm in. Because the studio's small and the overheads are quite low, and obviously I've been working a long time, I really do pick and choose the projects I get to do. So I don't have to do, I suppose, bread and butter projects or those sorts of things. And funny enough, I had a very interesting conversation with Ethan, as I say, my designer, the other day, where he just said, the thing is, he says, whatever project comes in, we'll have a good time doing it anyway. And that's what I feel. I could just see opportunity. And I remember doing, years ago, doing annual reports or doing quite dry corporate projects. And actually, to your question, you do try and find a bit of joy somewhere in it. It may not be the idea. It might just be a little touch of colour or typeface or detail where it just gives you a lift. And then I think that becomes quite infectious for everybody else around you. And I just don't subscribe to this blood, sweat and tears approach to work. I work really hard and I work all the time, but it's not work. I know it's all cliches, but you don't work a day in your life type thing, but I think it's true in my case.
I love what you just said there about finding the opportunity. It's something I say to my team all the time, that every project that comes in is an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I quite often see them turning away from me, rolling their eyes, kind of saying, he's saying that thing again. But it really is, isn't it? And it really is a privilege to be doing what we do.
Yeah.
I still find that joy after 30 odd years of working as well. So I'm glad that you said it.
And I come from a non-artistic family, and people had proper jobs, and I'm doing this. And so to me, it's a sort of luxury. When I've started to not enjoy wherever I was, I've moved on or I've changed. And I think that's the other key is, if you're not happy, I feel like I'm meeting quite a lot of people in the industry at the moment who are not happy with various changes within technology or clients or money and budgets, all the things that I experience. It's not everything's fine all the time sort of thing. But you feel, well, change then, do something about that. Otherwise, you're just going to get more and more miserable as you get older, which is the opposite direction to where I'm travelling. Well, obviously I'm getting older, but I'm
getting happier.
Getting happier, yeah, totally.
Good. Let's talk about your track record a little bit. So you stepped away from running a large agency, Hat Trick Design, to intentionally build something smaller and more flexible.
Yep.
What do you gain that scale couldn't give you?
I'm pleased looking back that I left when Hat Trick were doing really well. So it wasn't, things weren't working. I just felt I needed a change. And to your earlier question, I felt the joy had gone out of it a bit. I felt I was running a business. It was successful. We had some really lovely clients. We had an amazing team. But I just felt the joy had gone out of it for me because I wasn't designing enough. So I left with no plan whatsoever other than to see what sort of happened. And my plan was to have 6 months off because I'd made enough money to have a bit of a break. I'd not had more than 2 weeks off in 25 years or something like that ever. I'd gone straight from college, got a job almost straight away, had kids quite young. So I never had a chance to have any sort of longer break. So after 2 weeks of being off, I thought, this is amazing. This is the longest I've ever had not working. And then I sort of changed our lounge into my studio at home, and then just started sort of pottering around on projects. And then it sort of developed from there. So I think I didn't have a plan, but that's what sort of happened because I put myself in that place, I think. And then I just started falling back in love with designing again. And I had no intention of employing anybody. I just thought I'll just do this. And then one of my designers from Hattrick came in just for a bit of advice, Alice. And she stayed for a few weeks when I just started pottering. I wasn't doing any commercial work. I was just doing my own books and bits and pieces. She came and helped from some of that. And then she left and got a job. And I thought I really liked working with one person. I like being on my own and I like working with other people. So there's a nice, it's not a dichotomy, but there's a balance between those two things. I then took Alice out just for lunch, just to say thank you for all her work. And she wasn't very happy where she'd gone. And so I just said, well, if you ever thought about getting a job somewhere else, then I'd be quite interested. And she said she would. So she started the following week, I think. She stayed for 2.5 years. Then she left to go travelling, went to Japan. Then Rosie started. She stayed for 5 years. And then Ethan started 4 years ago. So I think in answer to your question, the thing I've gained is more direct control over the work, the being a bit more hands-on. Most people don't get a chance to do it twice. So setting up again, learning from the things I didn't enjoy from Hattrick meant I could not do that the second time. So don't repeat yourself, change if you need to. And then I think what it then did, without sort of realising, is then you could collaborate more and much closer than perhaps at Hattrick. When you viewed clients as more like clients, suddenly they were more like collaborators. So a good example for me, and this is where I think the studio sort of started to take off, I bumped into an artist called Marcus Lyon, as a photographer we used to use in the past, knew him a bit. He lives nearby. I just went for a chat with him and a coffee, and he mentioned he was doing this project in Brazil. Did I want to get involved? I went, yeah, that sounds interesting. So he talked a bit about it, and then I left, and he said, I've got a budget. And I said, well, I'll just do it if you take me to Brazil for this project. So he said, well, I'll take you to Brazil and I'll pay you. So I said, okay, fine. And I just remember walking back to the studio thinking, this is what work can be like. Like, it can be like this. You can just go for a chat with somebody, have a coffee. It sounds a bit simplistic, but Hattrick wasn't feeling like that. It was feeling much more like a machine. You had to keep feeding and getting more work in and then pitching for things. And that was almost a revelation with Marcus. And that project turned out to be wonderful, Somos Brazil. And we've subsequently done, I think, 6 more in different places in LA, in Detroit, San Jose. It's just turned into this amazing project that just evolved into something that it wasn't to start with. So
that was kind of one of your founding clients.
Yeah, there was that. Royal Mail got in touch after I'd been off about 6 months, I think maybe 9 months. They phoned up and said, are you working again or are you still mucking about? And I said, I'm still mucking about. And he said, oh, that's a shame because we've got a really nice brief in. So he sent it to me and I pitched for the stamps for Agatha Christie, and that went through. Again, really amazing project to do. Through that, I got to work with Agatha Christie Limited and did their identity and lots of book stuff with them. And again, it's not happenstance because it's more organised than that, or it's more you're putting yourself in the right places.
Let's talk a little bit about ideas in your work and your responsibility around that. So do you think design still has the power to genuinely change behaviour, or are we mostly refining systems that already exist?
I do believe that. I do believe design has an ability to, whether it's change behaviour, I suppose it is change behaviour, but I think it has an ability to have an effect. And I very much believe that we can make the world, this sounds a bit grand, but a better place, even in very small ways. There's so much, I think, quite bland, insipid, uninteresting work that is out in the world. It's not anybody's fault, whatever reason that is. And when you see something that to me brings you a little bit of joy in the writing, in the imagery, in the design, in whatever it might be, I think it just lifts your spirits a bit. And I think that's perhaps what design can do. Whether it can change the world, I think it probably can. I'm just not sure that's if I'm capable of doing that. But what I think I can do is inject, as I say, some joy or some play or some, I don't know, satisfaction or into the world. I think we can do that.
Let's jump on the AI topic then on the back of that, because, injecting ideas into work, creating those moments of joy, those smiles in the mind are more important than ever now.
Yeah,
we've got so much volume of work going out there that's maybe generated by AI automatically for whatever reason. Yeah, what's your kind of point of view on that?
I think it's really complicated. I suppose I grew up in an era, when I left college, there weren't any computers, for example. There was no internet, there was no email. Perhaps AI is a bigger jump than all of that, but that seemed like a big change and you had to adapt to it. Do we use AI? Sometimes. Ethan uses it more than I do. The younger designers use it more than I do. Am I that interested in it? I think probably not. But at some point, and I think it's too glib to say, it's just a tool and we can do this and do that. It will change things, but I think the advantage we have if we use actual intelligence instead of artificial intelligence is that we can then be a point of difference. I think it's the people that aren't really as interested in design. I think they are the people that will suffer more because AI may be able to replace what they're doing. I think somehow we have to put ourselves in a place where we can't be replaced.
How does Ethan feel about it?
Well, funny enough, he's quite old school, even though he's very young, which is why I think we really get on. He's fabulous. He's an absolutely fabulous designer to work with. And he's quite challenging, which is good. So coming back to that collaboration point, I can be slightly set in my ways and think we should do this and that. And he comes along and says, why don't we try that? And that's a bit old-fashioned, I think. He does tend to use it much more like a tool, for visuals and mock-ups and drafting text for things and captions. But we don't use it. Perhaps I'm more, because of being a bit more naive about it, thinking, we should do a project using AI without any knowledge of what that means or whether we should be or not. And he's a bit more pragmatic about it in some ways than I am. I want to know how all this stuff works. I don't want to be this old school designer. I don't grumble about this and it used to be better in my day and all that sort of stuff. It's so boring being like that. It's not about being at the cutting edge, but at least not being left behind. And that's probably what I think about AI. And at some point, if I don't embrace it or start to know a bit more about it, I'll probably be left behind. It's making me think I should do something about it.
I want to talk about a specific project that you've been part of. And I'll go back maybe a year or two. I think I started following Studio Sutherland on Instagram.
Right.
All of a sudden, Matter popped up, a denim brand, sustainable denim brand. And it looked really interesting. And lovely identity created by yourself and a really great tone of voice and a great cause. And I started following that as well. Yeah. And then I think there was an announcement about the first launch of denim from this brand. So I signed up for it. Yeah. And then this lovely guy, Bob, contacted me through Instagram. Yeah. And I said, I'd love a pair. And I was going to buy a pair. Right. And he gifted me a pair of these amazing jeans, which I absolutely love. And I'd love to know more about the project.
As a bit of background, I think it's a really interesting story about the point we were talking earlier about collaboration and ideal projects, things like that. I had very little knowledge about denim or jeans. I had a few pairs of jeans, but didn't really much about it. And then Bob got in touch just out of the blue, probably through social media. I can't really remember. He was working at a different denim company at the time, and he just said, it'd just be nice to do something together in the future. And that was sort of it. Nothing really happened. And then being what I'm like, I am really curious and I'm really interested. I'm really enthusiastic. And I thought, well, I should get in touch with him. So I travelled to Wales to meet him for no reason at all. I thought it'd be nice to have a chat. It took me all day to get there on public transport. And I thought, well, I'll just stay the weekend in South Wales. So I did. Saw him for a couple of hours, had a bit of a chat with him. There's no agenda. It was just interesting. I really got on with him. He's an amazing designer and writer, actually, but also just a really lovely guy. And I thought I'd love to do some stuff with him. And then probably maybe a year later, he got back in touch and said he was setting up this new brand about sustainable jeans. And would I be interested in sort of helping out? And I said, yeah, definitely. And without even thinking about it, I thought that'd be interesting. And then I think over time, I became so enthusiastic about it all. Eventually he said, why don't you become a partner in it? So I am now a partner in a sustainable jeans company. And nearly all of the thoughts have come from Bob. Bob knows so much about all of this. I just feel we're just helping it along. And I think the enthusiasm and the commitment and the interest in it, I hope has helped Bob sort of realise it in some ways. And I think that's why he made me a partner. Whether it takes off or goes anywhere isn't the point as much. It's almost just doing it for the sake of doing it and then seeing what happens and seeing if somebody else takes it on or we take it on more. So it's still early days. I mean, it's been going on for a while. It's a sort of slow burning project, which I really enjoying. We're doing lots of print pieces. We launched it at the Birmingham Design Festival, I think, the year before last. Did a talk about the design side and the getting involved with the design of the jeans themselves. Nearly all of it's come from Bob, but we've made a few suggestions and things. And then we got to work with Mohsin, who was the original designer of the jean, who's a really good denim designer and historian. Teaches a lot at various universities. Went to his house down in Crawley that's just full of denim, full of old machines. So the thing about, in some ways relating back to the AI conversation, you walk into his house, there's just piles of physical stuff everywhere. Old button making machines, all sorts of things. He just took this like bolt of fabric, the denim, and at the beginning of the day, and when we left at about 9 o'clock at night, he'd made a pair of jeans in front of us. I was absolutely in awe of the whole thing. And I thought this is only happening because Bob got in touch originally. I showed some sort of interest in it. I'm now down in Crawley spending a day with this guy who's just a genius. It's just got better and better as a project.
I just think it's a fantastic idea, fantastic brand. I receive the mailers that come through periodically out of nowhere.
It's a real labour of love for Bob and the studio, I think. It was so interesting going out to Birmingham, and I've spoken at the Birmingham Design Festival a few times about design. Things like we were in the product category talking about this, effectively the most sustainable jeans that have ever been made. And I thought, I'm part of this. This is incredible. And I'm talking about product design. And it's the first jean that uses 100% recycled denim from Cone. The buttons are removable and it uses tensile thread, so the whole jean can be recycled. And I didn't know, you know, if you send a pair of jeans off to be recycled or you put them in a recycling bin or whatever, they literally cut out the bits that have got no stitching or rivets or buttons, and they recycle that bit, which is about a third of the jean, if that, and the rest of it goes into landfill. So the idea is you put the buttons on yourself, we send the buttons out. There's a whole button project going on about can we get new buttons made and things like that. It's all really, really interesting, really fascinating, and something will happen with that, I think. And if we find more people like ourselves that are interested, that want to get involved with the project. So it's as much about collecting this team of people together as it is about producing lots of jeans. We've only done, whatever it is, about 50 pairs so far. They're made by Black Horse Lane, who are, again, incredible, going to a factory and watching people.
They're in Tottenham, aren't they?
Yeah. Watching people make stuff. It makes you quite humbled as a designer when you go to a factory where they actually physically make things. And again, is AI going to affect Black Horse Lane or denim makers? Or
maybe it'll make them even more appealing, that as an antidote to, fast fashion.
The physicality of it and the sort of tactility of it. And as you say, the environmental side and the sustainable side. I'm not sure I'm doing a very good job explaining the project, but it's just from my perspective, it's that sort of labour of love, and suddenly being from a graphic designer to doing that, I'm really interested in. How did that happen?
Do you think design should sometimes slow people down rather than instantly persuade them to buy something? Yeah,
well, Bob is very keen from the start, this whole idea of make noise, not jeans. We are producing all recycled stocks and things like that, but we are reducing it down and the simplification. So originally there was a card where the buttons came, attached to it that you took off and put onto your jeans. And then we'd had this thought, well, if it's going out with a catalogue, maybe the buttons just go on the back of the catalogue. So suddenly it's just one thing that goes out that has everything in it that you need. It's things like that. It's a design problem, but not necessarily branding or identity or visual. It's things like that I think have been really interesting. But in answer to your question about the slowing down, the latest catalogue's got a lot of photography by Jim Marsden, who's an amazing photographer, sort of arts photographer. And we're doing things like cyanotypes. And so there is a deliberate, slow process about it. A bit like the slow food movement and the slow fashion movement, things like that. So again, I'm sort of discovering all of this as we go along. But that's because of the curiosity, I think, means that then you're then interested in what's going on over there. And it couldn't be further from AI.
How does it work? You spent careers shaping ideas through graphics, and suddenly you're working with something physical and material and slow like denim. I mean, what does that teach you that graphic design doesn't?
I think it does come back again to curiosity of not just wanting to keep doing the same things. I still love designing marks and logotypes and symbols. I've not lost any of that. But I'm also, for example, we're doing a project with the artist Richard Wentworth at the moment. In fact, we're doing 2 typographic projects with him. And I knew him through another contact. And he's just this amazing, and I knew of him, but now we're working collaboratively with him. And it's his ideas. We're just helping with the typography effectively for a couple of sort of sculptures that are happening. And it's a whole new world, going to a foundry, like where they're casting things. So it's almost an extreme version of the factory for the denim, or going to Moson's house to make the denim. There's people there that are casting bronze sculptures, typographic sculptures. You know, that for me is sort of eye-opening. And I think it has a filter back to all the other projects that you do, because suddenly your eyes have been opened and there's doors that have been opened and other places to go, and the physicality of it and the fact that people are approaching things from a very different way. They're trying to work out structurally, if you're going to hang up these letters, which is going to happen next year, how structurally their sound they're going to be and how they're going to be attached to the walls and things like that. All things that I don't think I was as interested in the past. It feels like the work is having a bit more depth, or the projects have got a bit more depth than being too sort of superficial, I suppose, or two-dimensional. But I like doing all of these things. And I think the problem I've got really is how to manage wanting to do everything all at the same time.
I spoke with Alex Swatridge,
yes.
Dutch Scot, a while back. And what you just said there reminded me of her approach on a project as well. She'd worked with a textile manufacturer, I think, in Denmark. And it inspired her in her approach on the identity for them as well. So I think, rubbing shoulders with different disciplines is really helpful as well, because it will leads to a new approach, won't it?
It's interesting you mentioned Alex, because one of the first projects, and this is when I was still at Hattrick, and I worked with Alex then, we did a big project for Centrepoint, and we'd had this thought about designing patterns based on the sort of brutalist architecture, and then we thought, well, maybe we could design some patterns, and then maybe we could make fabrics and they could use them for clothes, and very notional ideas, slightly out of our comfort zone. And Alex was the one who found Ely Kishimoto, very well known fashion designers. So we approached them, and then they designed a whole raft of patterns for us, and then got the fabrics printed and all the textiles made. Then they did a fashion range based on, this is a property marketing job. You know, you've got no place really talking to fashion designers, and you're supposed to be doing like brochures and catalogues and things. And I look back now and I realise that was a project sort of towards the end of Hattrick, which I thought, this is the sort of thing I'm really interested in doing, because we would be doing patterns and we'd be doing like step and repeat in Illustrator and stuff. Ely Kishimoto were doing patterns that were just so much more sophisticated, so much more interesting, still informed by the building facade and stuff. So, and I remember working with Alex that really closely. I think about it now, and I think that was actually a really eye-opening project about the ways of working. And also maybe in a way, talking about collaboration, slightly giving up some control to someone else who's better at it than you. I look back now and I realised we'd done some patterns, but they were very crude in comparison to what they would do, because that's what they were renowned for, sort of thing. So it's interesting thinking about that. That was Alex.
You touched on something there which I'd like to dig into a little bit, which is about comfort zone. So how important is it for you to be outside of your comfort zone in your work? I mean, it feels like that's where you thrive.
Yeah, I think it is really important. Obviously, by the nature of the words, it is uncomfortable. But the reward, sometimes I feel you can sort of, when you're busy, you can sort of shortcut and you think, well, we'll do that because I know that will work. But actually, and a good example is something we did recently for the Holt art projects. We were really busy in the studio. It was a really nice, quite small arts project, but quite a well sort of renowned festival. And I'd just been in my notebook, which is the way I sort of work, is just like scribbling lots of things all the time. I just couldn't stop drawing H's and little brackety shape things. And I knew it would work, but I was just so underwhelmed. My whole notebooks were just full of these scribblings, all the same thing over and over again. And I remember showing it to Ethan. And even as I showed it to him, I've just felt like I don't really want to do this, but I know it will work and we've got to show it next week. I just remember thinking I need to push this more. We need to do a bit more research about Holt itself, and let's just do something. This is an opportunity to do something more interesting. It's not a big corporate project and things like that. So we did a bit more research, started looking up Holt, and it's quite renowned, that area. I know it quite well because going to Norwich at the university, that for flint. So we suddenly started looking at flint. I bought some flint from some shops and I started looking at the shapes of it. And suddenly this other idea just appeared from doing the research, and it was so much more interesting. And in the end, we didn't show anything else. We just showed her this flint idea and the client. And I do remember it feeling not like one of our projects in a good and bad way, in the fact that I felt really nervous because I really wanted her to do it, but also in a way that it wasn't quite like some of the other projects we'd done. And so, and they loved it.
You burnt all the bracket sketches.
Well, but I've got them in my notebook. But I think I didn't waste my time going through it. But in answer to your question, I think it was just, this is too comfortable. We should do something that doesn't look like we've done it. And I like that. And in the same way of working on the denim, I feel totally out of my depth and I don't know enough about it. But standing up at Birmingham and talking about it, you think, well, that again was nerve-wracking. If somebody had asked me to stand up and do a talk about, I don't know, typography or joy, or I think I would have thought, yeah, I can do that. I still get I get very nervous doing public speaking, but I sort of enjoy it. But again, because of the comfort zone thing. But I think doing something like you're on the product design bit felt very out of place.
But maybe more rewarding afterwards.
Absolutely. Afterwards, You just think, oh, blimey, we've done that. And once you've done those things and you stepped out of your comfort zone, I think then it every time becomes easier to do.
I always like to wrap these things up with a quick fire round of questions. It's always a nice way to kind of just get some short, snappy answers from you. Okay. Idea or execution?
Well, both, without a doubt.
One material you'd love to design with that you haven't yet?
I think that comes back to my earlier question is I don't know. I wouldn't have written down denim. I wouldn't have written down cast bronze, but those have come about through the projects and through the curiosity. So I would like to design with anything, really, especially things I haven't used before.
What's harder to fix, a weak idea or a weak client brief?
I think fixing weak ideas is easy. Fixing weak client briefs, that's probably harder, but doable. I'm not entirely sure I believe there are weak client briefs, because I think it's the way you respond to it, and we often rewrite the briefs anyway. And I like that stage of it, the sort of strategic side. So it comes back to opportunity, doesn't it? I think every project has an opportunity somewhere buried in there. You have to find it.
Make less or make better?
Definitely make better. I would say make more. In the studio, we have a slightly insane number of projects all going on at the same time. And I realise I like that buzz, and I like the fact that they sort of tip over into each other. I read a really interesting thing, this is a slightly longer answer, but the other day about a psychologist talking about when you're stuck on something, just stop and go and do something else. I mean, it's sort of cliches, and we all know some of these things about going for a walk. But my thing is probably less going for a walk. It's almost like we'll just go and think about a different project. And what he was saying was, in the background, your brain is still processing the thing you were trying to solve an hour ago. When you come back to it, your brain has done something magical. I don't believe this sort of bolt of lightning just hits you. I think you work and work and work, and you have the right circumstances that things are going to happen, ideas are going to come, because you fed things in, you've thought about it, you've worked on something else, then that feeds into what you're doing now.
Have you ever read the John Cleese book on creativity?
No, I'd really like to, actually.
Yeah.
I've seen several of his videos that talk about that.
Tiny little book, and it's got that kind of process in it as well, about planting the seed, not overthinking it, letting it gestate, and it will come.
The analogy I use with students sometimes is I drink a lot of green tea and stuff like that. It's the brewing sort of stage that you just have to leave it for a bit, but not too long.
A project you wish you'd said no to sooner?
Sometimes there have been, I would say, probably more people that I've not enjoyed working with as much. I am genuinely enthusiastic and curious, so it's quite hard to suppress my enthusiasm for things. When I left the partners, I remember David Stewart, who I'd worked with quite a lot there, one of the partners, in his sort of goodbye talk, said the thing he goes, I think about you is, he said, your sort of boundless enthusiasm for everything, certainly in the studio, less so when I went to client meetings because I never spoke to anybody. But he said, even if we get rejected, that route that you've done, you just want to think of something else. And I think that endless, sort of slightly Labrador-like enthusiasm sort of means however difficult clients are or projects are, there's always something you can do.
One object you own that perfectly embodies good design?
Oh, God, that's a question. I'll have to think about that.
You've got a beautiful notebook on the desk.
Well, there's my notebook, which I thought about saying that, but then I feel it's a bit glib because I've designed it. but that is an interesting, just a slight aside, but relates, is that I am an obsessive list writer, notebook taker, drawer of things. None of it is any good. Like, it's not for public consumption. It's just for me to get stuff out of my head. I was getting through like a Moleskine book every few weeks and realised I was just funding Moleskine. So I decided to design my own notebook. And they're not for anybody else. They're just for me to use. I've got enough of them to last me until I'm 85, I think. And I get through about one a month. But the point being, I designed it exactly as I wanted it to be. I looked at all the ones I'd use, all different sizes, got the size, got the paper weight right. There's different colours. It was all sort of upcycled materials. It attaches a pen to it. It's very simple, but it brings me joy every time I get it out. And it's perhaps that's a signal of something that I really appreciate. I think there's loads of other things that people have designed that are much better, but it's, for me, a good sort of embodiment, I suppose.
One word you'd remove from the design industry forever?
It's quite a lot of words. Ideation would be one. Any of that talk about brand onions and all that stuff, I can't stand. I think what I don't like is when people dress things up to make it sound more complicated than it is. Most of the work we do is strategic. We work with a lot of strategists, but I always slightly rally against not using common sense sort of language and trying to make things more complicated. So I think it's anything that makes design more complex. I think our role is to make things simpler for people to understand.
And that's a good cue, because that brings me to my last question, which is, what's the simplest idea you wish you'd come up with first?
Yeah, that's a hard question, isn't it? Do you mean in terms of a design or just a...
Let's go for a design.
I was reading a book recently, or rereading a book called Fantasy by Bruno Munari, who's probably my favourite designer. Him and Enzo Mari, I think, are the two. I don't know if you saw that show, the Design Museum of Enzo Mari, was just phenomenally good. I went 3 times. I'd seen it in Milan because I went there to see it when it was on, and I went to see it at the Design Museum several times. And there's work in that that's just stunning, I think.
Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and speak with you. Well, I hope that we get to meet up and catch up again in the future.
I'd love it. Thank you very much for asking me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Check out Jim's portfolio at studio-sutherland.co.uk or follow him on Instagram at studio_Sutherland.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, rate us, and share it with someone who'd appreciate it. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin and Mia Sullivan, and special thanks to Pixiu Podcasts in London. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, so take care.